the U.S. will die. Did you know in the next 15 minutes, another person in the U.S. will die by firearm? I am Keisha Nicole, and we have teamed up with Amnesty International to talk about the effects of gun violence, solutions, and how we can break the cycle. I know many of us have been affected by gun violence, whether it's someone, that's maybe been shot or even killed in your family, or maybe you yourself have been affected by gun violence. I know for me, last year, my cousin got killed by firearm, gun violence in Los Angeles. Killer's still out on the run right now. So it definitely hits me very, very personal. It definitely hits home. And today we have a dynamic panel that's going to speak on the effects of gun violence and, of course, how we can break the cycle. So first, I would like to introduce from Amnesty International, we have Ernest Culverson.
Hello, good evening, Keisha. This is Ernest Culverson. I'm the campaign manager with Amnesty International's End Gun Violence campaign. Thanks for having us.
I want to talk a little bit about your position, Ernest.
Okay. Yeah, as the campaign manager, I run our Amnesty International USA section on gun violence. So that's working both with our members, working with federal legislators, state and local legislators, in passing common sense legislation, as well as educating communities, educating individuals, and pushing gun violence safety, gun violence laws that will better communities. We're not against the Second Amendment. We're not looking to eliminate firearms as persons want to own them, but we are looking to establish common sense laws across the country.
Got it. And next up, we have Pure Justice founder with Sasha Leggett. Welcome, Sasha.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sasha Leggett. I'm the executive director of Pure Justice. We are a criminal justice reform and economic justice reform community-based organization that focuses on doing policy work, community organizing, and creating change here in Harris County.
Awesome. Thank you for being here with us today. Up next, we have Community Justice Action Fund, Gregory Jackson.
All right. Good evening. Thanks for having me. My name is Gregory Jackson. I'm the advocacy director for the Community Justice Action Fund. Our organization is really focused on advancing policy that reduces gun violence in Black and brown communities across the country. We do that by prioritizing community-based solutions that hopefully will avoid mass incarceration and, frankly, carceral or policing approaches to ending gun violence. I come to this work as a survivor of gun violence, so this is something that is extremely personal to me, but I've also seen and worked with a lot of the programs that we're advocating for and seeing how impactful they can be. So hopefully I'll have the chance to kind of share a little bit more about solutions that exist beyond policing and incarceration.
Thank you, Greg. Up next, we have Harris County Commissioner Rodney Ellis.
Keisha, it's good to be with you, and I'm so proud to be affiliated with Amnesty International. I've followed their work and worked with them on many criminal justice reforms over the years. I'm just so glad to see Sasha and Greg as well. I think it's important to have young people who engage in protesting, but also who have a clear idea of what policies ought to be in place to improve the quality of life for people and reduce that cycle of violence in Black and brown communities in particular.
So I was gonna ask what led you all to work with Amnesty, but Greg, because you said it's very personal to you, obviously, can I hear from everybody else and even you, Rodney?
Well, I first got to know Amnesty International, to be honest with you, when I was in graduate school. I did a little summer program over in Europe, and I happened to come in contact with somebody who was working out of the London office. And years later, when I ended up being a staffer to Congressman Mickey Leland for several years, Amnesty International was right down the front line. And I was in the Texas legislature for a long time. Look, I represent a big district, about 1.2 million people. Inner city Houston is a big part of it. I grew up in Sunnyside. I've never been personally impacted in terms of gun violence. It was certainly in my house. My brother was in and out of the criminal justice system throughout his childhood. But the neighborhood I grew up in, Sunnyside, is probably, if you Google it right now, Sunnyside in Houston is probably about the 4th or 5th most dangerous neighborhood in the country. So obviously my constituents, I have had to console friends and family members, constituents who had to deal with someone killed, and just such a large number of weapons in my commissioner's precinct in Harris County in particular. Give me a close connection to this crisis.
Yeah, and for me, I come to this work just from the desire of wanting to include communities in the conversation and policies that impact their lives. I originally went to law school because I thought that that was a way to create change. But oftentimes when we're thinking about policies that have widespread impacts, sometimes the community voice is missing, and community organizing helps to make sure that those voices are heard and are considered when policies are being made. I have had experience with gun violence. When I was an undergrad student walking down the campus of Clark Atlanta University, myself and a young lady were stopped at gunpoint by gentlemen who pulled a shotgun out and just put it in our faces because we wouldn't stop to talk to them while they were driving by. And ultimately, a few years after that, another young lady was shot and killed in that same space that caused the campus to shut down the ability to drive through it. I also have over 15 childhood friends that have been killed due to gun violence. So I'm very familiar with it, and it is something important to me.
Anyone else on that one?
I mean, if I can add, I was an activist around ending gun violence for a few years when I met Amnesty International, Ernest, and so many others on the team. They launched a campaign to address this issue locally, but also to make sure people across the world saw how bad of a crisis this is. Over 100,000 people are shot or killed by guns every year. And when you look at the top causes of death, this is the only one that has received zero research since 2019, and very minimal policy or investment in it across the country. And so I was able to join Amnesty International. We did numerous briefings eventually that led to the United Nations, which was really exciting, and basically put pressure on countries outside of America to acknowledge this as the human rights crisis that it is, and acknowledge that the oppressive government has not stepped up and addressed this issue like they would any other human rights crisis in America. And I believe, frankly, that's mainly because this impacts Black and brown folks disproportionately. And so we were able to uplift that at the global scale via Amnesty International, and just really excited to see that even some of their human rights reviews that are being rolled out now are calling out America for not stepping up in this issue.
Keisha, I wanted to add that, it's important for us here in Texas, because this is such a big pro-gun state. And every time there's a tragedy anywhere in the state or around the world, all folks in my position, politicians, rush to put out statements offering their thoughts and prayers. And at some point, you get a little sick of that. It's kind of like a cliche. I mean, it is important. And when there's nothing else you can do, it is good to offer thoughts and prayers. But when you're in politics, or if you're an activist, you can do a hell of a lot more. And when you look at these statistics, it's a public health crisis. I think in 2017, 611 deaths from gun injury in this county, both intentional and unintentional. 611. And that's just the 1 year that I've looked at statistics, 2017. So clearly it indicates we ought to do more. And so much gun violence in America, in Texas in general. So, part of the interest is let's do more than just get out there and show empathy and say we have thoughts and we have somebody in our thoughts and prayers. What policies can we bring about? And that's why Amnesty is so important.
Now, I saw right here where it says nearly 5 million Americans bought a firearm for the first time in 2020. What do you believe will be the outcome with more firearms in the hands of Americans than ever before?
More for shooting one another, both intentionally and unintentionally. Whether it's an accident or, in this country, just guns are everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
and by the way, we ship them every place else. I mean, we in America, by the way, we are the source of drugs because they've been purchased from other countries. It supports the cartels, and then we manufacture the guns that end up everywhere else. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think the gun, the increase of gun sales in this pandemic, where we said that gun violence was the first American pandemic that just wasn't labeled that. And so during this time where online gun sales went up, or like for the month of March, over 68%. Just in that 1 month during the pandemic. And so, as Commissioner said, we're going to see possibly an increase in shootings, and individuals many times look at, mass shootings, but, we never talk about the suicide rate. We never talk about domestic violence in that as well, let alone the shootings that take place in Black and brown communities. And so with this increase in guns purchases, and possibly the lack of thorough background checks because of police force and the lockdowns and that kind of thing, that has been on the last of the things of priority, we may see individuals that should not have access to a weapon now have access to a weapon. Some states, there's no requirement to say person-to-person purchasing of guns. So individuals may sell a gun to a family friend, to a neighbor, that shouldn't have access to a gun. And so with that, we just see a lot of guns now floating around the country that we may or may not have record of. We don't know who has. And so, not even just in 2020, but moving on to 21, 22, 23, you're going to have this number of guns. People are not going to throw them away. So you're going to have them consistently being transported, carried, et cetera, throughout the country.
I saw that study from Everytown, and it says that U.S. residents are 25 times more likely to be shot to death than residents in similar countries. And then in terms of the racial impact of it, in Black and brown communities, people are more at risk. A Black man is 14 times more likely than a white non-Hispanic man to be shot to death in this country. So clearly there's a tremendous disparity.
And 12 times more likely than a police officer. And so I think a lot of it is we have to realize with the oversaturation of firearms, we are putting more guns in the hands of people who are willing, unfortunately, to take justice into their own hands. I think the big problem that we're up against right now is that we've been tricked. Americans think that bringing a gun in the home makes you safer. But statistics do not show that. Statistics know bringing the gun to your home impacts the likelihood of risk of harming your children, of harming your significant other, of harming someone in interpersonal conflict, especially in the Black community. I think there's this big misconception that gun violence in our community is based on felonies or gangs or no. Upwards of, when you look at the numbers, 76% of gun-related homicides are not related to a known felony. These are just interpersonal conflicts that escalate to the point of lethal action. And when you put more guns in more folks' hands, then we're going to see that happen, and it's a sad story, but it's really what the gun industry has done. They've marketed and almost brainwashed us to think that this is how we keep our families safe, that this is how we keep each other safe. In reality, it is increasing the risk that is literally now the number one cause of death for Black folks, under the age of 44 if you're a male, and under the age of 19 if you're a woman. And it's a sad story that we really need political action to rein this all in.
But Greg, I wanted to kind of piggyback on something that you said in terms of, it's not just the marketing of the, gun manufacturers that, this keeps us safe. It is stereotypes that say that we have to be afraid of each other and we need to be protected from each other, specifically in Black and brown communities, and we have to start changing those narratives that there's something wrong with Black and brown communities or Black and brown people, that you need to protect yourself against them. And that also leads to gun violence, and specifically police violence, as you guys have already talked about a lot of those statistics. And so we have to be mindful. How do we reshape those kind of conversations stop those stereotypes and narratives so that people don't feel that there's something to be afraid of or a need to protect themselves to the point of where they even want to engage with a weapon.
I think one of the easiest ways we can start that is by holding our media accountable. One thing that I'm really frustrated by, and you can do it yourself if you're tuning in, when you think about gun violence that impacts someone of color, all the imagery is police lights, yellow tape, gun casings, investigators, police people walking around with the dogs in the crime scene, but we're dehumanizing the people. Unfortunately, that they only do that to us. When you look at other communities and they talk about someone getting shot, you see the kid playing soccer, you see the mother that lost so much, and we are literally being dehumanized by our own media, which reinforces that stereotype. And so I think everyone plays a role in that. That's something that we have to continue to call them out. Even when you're sharing terrible stories about what's happening in our communities, be mindful that these are not just stats. These are people. These are family members. These are children. These are uncles. These are fathers. These are mothers. And their story and their lives matter. And they're being dehumanized in the media every day. And so I know that that's a big priority for us, is to help shift the narrative around not only the violence that's happening, but how we present the violence in the media and to our community to ensure that we're not reinforcing these negative stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. And I know I saw a lot, honestly, during this pandemic, you saw so many people, on the news, you go on the news and you see so many young kids being killed because they're at home, away from school, working virtually, and there's a gun laying around, or you've seen so many situations in a household where people aren't normally at home together because they work, they go to their 9 to 5 every single day, but now they're at home because of this pandemic. And what happens? They kill each other because there's a gun sitting in the house, and maybe there was some rage or some anger, and they got into it, and the first thing they do is go grab the gun, right?
It's pretty tragic. Gun sales and ammunition sales have gone up during this pandemic as well. I saw where we were discouraging people from going out on Black Friday to shop, and I read one press account where people went to one store and they left once they found out they were out of ammunition, already out of ammunition on Black Friday. Wow. That's pretty discouraging.
Yeah. And just on that, right, having, young people have to be at home, like you're saying, Keisha, have to be at home for school. Parents still have to go to work, but there's unlocked guns at the home. Mm-hmm. And so they have access to that. And so one piece, as Greg was talking about the media, as I was doing some avid reading over the weekend, just the number of young people that have been shot during this time that hasn't gotten that mass press of being shot at home during this time, that haven't received, that headline that this is still happening during this time. And, me as a conspiracy theorist sometimes, is that planned, that's not being talked about in the media? Is it, why hasn't that information been publicly talked about of these young people that are shooting themselves or shooting, cousins or brothers or sisters, et cetera, during this time period? And then, just lastly, on piggybacking on Commissioner's comment, a friend of mine, owns a gun, and we were talking about it, how that, the lack of ammunition that's even out there for gun shops and target locations to even have to provide for individuals that come in, do target practice, et cetera, that they're running out of and can't find ammunition during this time period of the pandemic. So it's all somewhere. It's just, who has it and whose hands is it in?
Rodney, I want to talk to you about the petition. Can you speak on that?
Say it again.
I want to talk to you. Or was it you about the petition? Who had the petition?
Me.
It was Ernest. It was
Ernest.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the petition?
Yeah, so the petition we have right now, currently there are, as we're talking about gun violence and looking specifically in Black and Brown communities, there are organizations like Sasha's, like Greg's and others that are doing great work on the ground and have been doing great work on the ground. And part of what, since I became the manager of the campaign, is really looking to push and elevate these organizations so that they're getting the same type of press coverage. They're getting the same type of information out and in that in every town or a Mom's Demand, which is nothing against them. but these organizations are doing things directly in communities that are underserved. And, many times now during this pandemic have been doing double duty. They're not only doing gun violence work, they're also doing pandemic work. So there's a piece of legislation in the federal government that Senator Cory Booker introduced called the Break the Cycle of Violence Act. And it's where the funding for these community organizations will come from the federal government versus state and local, which many times, according to who's in office and the political will, that funding gets cut, it gets diminished, et cetera. And so we currently have a petition that we're asking and urging folks to sign for urging your congressperson, either senator or House representative, to support and sponsor the Break the Cycle of Violence Act, so that these funds can be stable, that these organizations don't go start one year, close down the next year, et cetera. And so the link there is on the screen. If you can go and support, and by signing the petition, that would then urge your congressperson to co-sponsor the Break the Cycle of Violence Act. And just right now, for the state of Texas, neither of your senators currently have sponsored the Senate version, and none of the House of Representatives at the point earlier today, none of the House of Representatives for the state of Texas has signed on to be a co-sponsor.
We'll get that changed, and I'll get permission to it. Sasha will make sure that we put it in our legislative package, but I'll get some of our, and of course the key is when you get bipartisan support, but surely we can, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Al Green, Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Yes.
But we'll get that done. In fact, late on the night, I'm on Cory Booker's doing a Zoom to try to help some folks in that Senate race.
Yeah.
I hope this will, it's look, we have we've demonized responsible gun safety so much. It's just difficult. Even when I was in the legislature, I never owned a gun.
Mm-hmm.
I always voted right, carried the legislation. But we've put so many people in a corner. An assault weapon ban, just think about it. It's just ridiculous the way we have let the folks out there advocating for guns dominate the conversation. So it is important to get more of these grassroots groups and diverse ones out there active in this space.
Yeah.
And if I can jump in, the beauty of the Break the Cycle Act is that it's all about funding community-based solutions to address gun violence. Mm-hmm. It's not about the hardware. So folks who are concerned about having their gun, owning their gun, access to their gun, these programs are focused on reducing the risk behaviors that lead to gun violence. Commissioner Ellis, you said it earlier, this is a public health crisis that no one can deny, but you don't respond to a public health crisis with a crime approach. You respond with a public health approach. And that means looking at the risk behaviors that leads to these conflicts, looking at what are the root causes. One thing that people overlook, over 70% of someone who commits a violent offense was first a survivor. But we don't have federal survivor support services for victims of gun violence, right? The other big factor is that in most major cities, only 2% of the population are responsible for 80% of the gun violence. And while there are numerous programs to reactively deal with them from a policing and investigative approach and a carceral approach, most major cities have zero programs that are focused on proactively engaging these folks before violent crime happens, even though police can already predict who they are, unfortunately. And so when we talk about the Break the Cycle Act, it's investing in those proactive solutions to deal with folks who are most at risk of being a victim or being a future offender, and ensuring that they have healthy ways to process their pain, their trauma, but most importantly, there are resources for them to navigate through what could lead to gun violence. And so whether they're Republicans or Democrats, I think this is something that anyone can champion, We did a hearing on this in 2019 in Congress. It was the first hearing on urban gun violence, and we presented these solutions. And we have Republicans nodding their heads as strong as the Democrats, right? Because they knew it was less about their access and more about getting to the root causes that lead to these conflicts. So hopefully, Commissioner Ellis, we need you in this fight. Everyone viewing, we need you in this fight, because this is something that should be pretty easy to garner bipartisan support once people really recognize how actually there's like zero funding federally to invest in proactive solutions to address the risk behaviors of gun violence.
But
I'll make sure I work county people around the country to make sure that we're passing resolutions in support of it. I'm sorry, Sasha, I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I was just going to go back to what Greg was saying about community-based solutions and how important it is to partner with community-based organizations, and specifically those who are doing grassroots organizing, because they're the organizations that individuals trust. We see a lot of violence happening in our communities because people don't feel comfortable in our communities reporting issues. And they don't feel comfortable for reporting issues because they understand, specifically in Black and Brown communities, that they themselves may become a victim just for trying to seek help. And so when you partner with community-based organizations, they have already built in the trust. They have, built relationships with those communities and individuals who are going through difficult times and can help get information that the data itself doesn't capture. We talk about these issues in numbers and percentages, but these are human beings. These are real people. These are stories. These are families that are being impacted. And oftentimes that can get left out if we are not engaging with community-based organizations that individuals feel like they can talk to and trust to help advocate on their behalf or bring them the solutions that they need.
And to be very clear, the community-based solutions that we're advocating for funding for, this is not just like giving money to the football team, not just paying for a cookout. We're not saying any community-based group. We're talking about evidence-based programs that have seen proven results. Organizations like Advanced Peace, who have in multiple major cities, have reduced gun violence by over 50% by implementing their cognitive behavior therapy approach. We're talking about violence interruption programs across the country that are negotiating ceasefires and de-escalating conflict. We're talking about hospital-based violence intervention programs that provide those services with the best doctors and researchers and social workers available that are in the hospitals working with victims of gun violence. And so I just want to reinforce that organizations like Sasha's and Pure Justice, there are really amazing organizations across the country that are doing this, that are seeing proven results, frankly, have been more effective than policing. They're not getting the funding and the resources or even the attention from the federal government. Now, we feel like that is by design, but we're also not going to accept that as the status quo. We're here to continue to advocate and fight alongside everyone on the panel to push these solutions forward. In Texas, we're seeing multiple cities start to step up and create their own Office of Violence Prevention, create grant programs, start to recruit some of these organizations into their city or uplift local ones that are doing great work. But we just need more state level and federal level support to make this sustainable, to frankly save lives.
Well, Greg, with Sasha's leadership and advocacy, her group and others here in Harris County, we're the third largest county in the country, almost 5 million people. That's a population larger than 25 states. Here are 5 things we've done. We set up a safe surrender program in 2019. And what it does, we've expanded to 22 county felony courts. And the program involves people charged with domestic violence, storing their guns temporarily with the Harris County Sheriff's Office until the cases are resolved. And we streamlined the system for reporting criminal convictions to the Texas Department of Public Safety. We set up a new health department task force focused on violence prevention. We set up a free gun lock program launched in Precinct 1, the constable's office, focused on preventing injuries and fatalities caused by guns that are generally just simply not stored properly. And the 5th thing is we maintain partnerships with local organizations and community members, advocates, and experts to develop community-based strategies for confronting gun violence. Now, I hope with the change in Washington, D.C., we'll get something on the federal level. But, a lot of this has to be bottom up. And a lot will depend on who controls the various chambers in Washington, D.C., and we see what can pass. But it is important to have diverse community-based organizations who are creative, who make noise to break us away from the culture that we have right now.
We have so many comments and questions from people who are watching right now, but I did want to ask Sasha, working in the community, what do you see that can help reduce gun violence?
I think Greg talked a lot about this, and basically approaching these issues from a public health standpoint. We have to stop using, a penal system to address issues that are actually systemic. A lot of these things result from, lack of resources, structural racism, institutional racism. These things are baked into the way in which our institutions function. They pull resources out of our communities. They lead to historic and chronic disinvestment, and those are things that lead to acts of violence. And in addition to unaddressed trauma and other issues, and we cannot continue to penalize people because our governments or our, representatives have not invested properly in the solutions that address the root causes of these issues. And that's what I'd say, continue with the public health approaches, continue working with community-based organizations. Pure Justice does a Black Man's Healing Circle, so that Black men who have been victims of crime, Black men who have been incarcerated, Black men who have had all kinds of issues can come together and actually talk about these issues and talk about solutions to getting over some of the experiences that they've had. And that's important because it's not happening enough in our communities.
Add just one little piece of that. I mean, when the governments don't want to invest in our communities and they're saying it costs too much, they don't have the money, the biggest thing to remind them is that they're already paying for it.
Yes.
Homicide has a price tag to it as well.
Big price.
And that's $800,000 per homicide. When you look at what the city has to pay for investigative services, coroners, impact on cost of living, et cetera. And when you fold that up to the federal level, that number is $13 million lost per homicide. So you mean to tell me that you can't help save this person's life for less than 13 million? And we know that's not true. And so we're not asking for folks to pull money from other programs or strip an entire budget or cut other important education initiatives. What we're asking them to do is invest in life instead of paying for death. And right now we're paying a very big price tag for death. And it's our community that's dying, but it's the same neighborhoods who are not getting those investments, that are dealing with schools that are dysfunctional or broken or underfunded, that are dealing with food deserts or lack of resources, or who are lacking opportunities to have their own homes and are stuck renting or in public housing. There's so many programs that exist that get to the root causes that are way cheaper than waiting for a homicide to happen, that our leaders are not investing in. And so this is not only the right thing to do, it's the fiscally responsible thing to do. And I think that's what makes it a much easier pill for people on both sides of the aisle to swallow.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, we're talking here on this platform, but for a person that's, an everyday person, because we're talking about getting to the root of the problem, and there's so much trauma in our communities, right? How do they find out about these resources and organizations? Because for me, this is like my first time hearing about a lot of these resources. So for someone who is watching, who does want to get help and go through that process, so we can stop that person from being the next person from using a firearm irresponsibly, how can they, get information about these different organizations?
Absolutely. They can, check out organizations on social media. COVID-19 has, expanded everybody's social media presence. So there's a ton of information out there on social media, both Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. They can do a variety of research. I know that our local government offices, and particularly in Commissioner Ellis's office, there's a list of community-based organizations that if you reach out to those offices, they can point you in the right direction. Right now, Pure Justice is working on a Empowered Survivor project with other local domestic violence organizations to address domestic violence in communities of color for those survivors. We're offering them direct cash assistance so that they can get out of their situation if they need to get out of their situation. And they can find those resources or apply to those resources at purejustice.org under our COVID-19 responses tab. but there are a multitude of resources. But like you're saying, it's really difficult to get it out. And we need platforms like yours and others to continue to uplift all of the great work that we're doing in the community so that we can service those who need it the most.
And there's so much out there. I tell folks all the time, when all this fails, just Google it. Sometimes when I want to know something about my health or anything in the world, there's so much, and we got to check it out, sort through it. But just Google the various services. Or you could call the mayor's office or my office or a congressperson's office. But it's really not that difficult to go out there and get involved. And even if you find a few dead ends, just keep trying.
And I will say a big challenge is that a lot of communities don't have access to all these programs. And it's a sad truth. And that's because we don't have the funding across the country and even across the state to be able to scale these programs at the level that they are needed. I know for me, I was shot, and to find the nearest therapist that dealt with trauma from my neighborhood meant I had to go all the way across town to get to that therapist. You know, when I was shot, there were no survivor support services. When I was in the hospital, I had a doctor, I had a chaplain who came and prayed over me, and I had my family. That was it. No one was helping me with, what is your mental health support needs? Do you need to be relocated? How do we make sure you're safe when you get back to your neighborhood? And so while there are a lot of programs that exist, and Sasha and Pure Justice, Commissioner Ellis are fighting for this every day, there's still a huge shortage in too many of our communities. And that's why these resources and fighting for these funding resources are so critical right now.
And here in Harris, in Texas in particular, because we have not taken the Obamacare money, which includes mental health coverage. You know, in Cook County, by the way, they were able to take Obamacare money to provide mental health services for many people who were in the Cook County jail, by the way. But mental health, particularly during this pandemic, I mean, mental health challenges for all of us are just off the chain. Because as human beings, we were not intended. Thank God for Zoom. You know, I thought they talked about Lionel Richie's song before this pandemic. I had no idea what Zoom was. But imagine, we as human beings we were not designed to not have interaction with other people. So that's leading to even more mental health challenges.
That's what I'm afraid of when the kids, you know, because the kids have been off for so long and just sit at home and looking at a computer all day long, working virtually. Like we're not meant for that. The kids are supposed to be in school, socializing with other kids and building different skills in their character and so much. And they're missing out on that working. I mean, unfortunately, this is what we're dealt with right now.
And mental health coverage is expensive. So I hope after this election, only 2 big states don't take the affordable health care money, Texas and Florida. 2 big outliers. And that would mean, $10 billion a year for healthcare, including mental health services.
But, lastly, I know Keisha got some other questions, but on going back on how to find these organizations, I mean, I think that's why Break the Cycle of Violence Act is so important, because many of these organizations also don't have the capacity to have, you know, updated websites all the time, or dedicated individuals, or Wi-Fi. May not have access to Wi-Fi. You know, there may be a smaller group organization that, using Starbucks for their Wi-Fi or what have you. And so this funding would also, you know, provide that base and that assets, and, you know, for them to be able to build out, so that when individuals Google, the information do come up, or the website comes up and it's not 6 years old, and individuals that was there then are not there any longer. And, you know, you're getting a email bounce back, et cetera. So Break the Cycle of Violence Act most definitely is very important, even just to provide those resources to get organizations up and running and strong as well.
That's super important, Ernest, too, because one of the things that we do when we talk about grassroots, that means literally going into the community. So we're not always expecting people to come up to us. We're going to come and find you, because we already know where you are. We already know that you need help, and we're going to come and bring help to you. But Harris County is huge. So there needs to be more Pure Justices, you know, more resources to organizations like ours, so that we can go to the community and meet people where they are and get them serviced right there. You know, stop expecting them to seek us out, because sometimes people are so burnt out that all they can do is try to get to the next day.
Right.
Yeah.
And we want to stop that, and we want to be able to help them as much as we can. So, the Break the Cycle Act would be amazing if we could get those kind of resources.
I do want to get to some of these questions from the chat here, guys. The first one says, do you believe gun culture has overridden the need of common sense gun control? Ooh.
Yes. They've been winning the narrative in the media, and we got to just push back on it big time. Sasha, I remember the group we were working with, the Moms Against Violence, I think. And I was so glad they would go into Fifth Ward. You got me? And it was not the most diverse group, but we got to find more in these communities of color in particular that get it. And just realize that violence is systemic. It's a public health problem, and we got to approach it that way.
And they built an entire industry off of this. And I think that's something we can never forget. I mean, they're making billions of dollars off of our deaths. And if you look at the marketing that they're doing, on one side, they're marketing that this is right for us to protect our Black families, et cetera. And on the other side, they're showing images of protesters, and they're telling people you need to buy weapons to protect yourself before they run in your neighborhood. Like these companies are manipulating fear on both ends for profit and feeding this culture. And it's not just, it's not just the music videos. I think we always want to give the rappers and them a hard time, but there's an entire industry behind all of this. Just like we talk about certain brands of cars or drinks, et cetera, there's an equally manipulative industry that's pushing guns into our communities. And I think we need to hold them accountable, but also recognize that we are fighting against a culture that is not by accident, and it's not something that we adopted. This is something that has been fed to our community for far too long.
For decades. I mean, we all grow up. What do we play? Cowboys. I mean,
Yeah.
Well, we want to play soccer.
Yeah.
Football, basketball.
That's true. I do want to get to this question. With the End Gun Violence essay contest, and this is for Ernest, why is it so important to hear from the younger generation to end this cycle? And we're going to talk about the essay contest after this as well.
Yeah. They're the ones that's lived this many times, right? In their communities. They're the ones that have the answers many times. But, folks many times don't listen to them. And so this essay contest that we are sponsoring through Amnesty International will give them that opportunity to have that voice, to be able to talk about on paper what it looks like in their community. How has gun violence affected their community? How it is, they have to walk back and forth to school each and every day. Try to play ball, as Commissioner was saying, play ball in the neighborhood. And so, getting young people's voice in this conversation is most important, as well as we look to eradicate this violence in the communities.
And it's $1,000 for college students and $500 for high schoolers.
Correct. We have the two categories, as you stated, $1,000 for college students, $500 cash prize for the high school students. You can get the information directly on the website, and the link it will be coming through the ticker throughout this evening. And most definitely, December 31st currently is the deadline, but we may look to extend that as well. But yeah, it's two prizes: college students, high school students. Come on and get this money.
What a great idea. Encourage young people to learn how to write, not just learn how to tweet. Watching what goes on. Hey, I want to thank you all. Speaking of Cory Booker, I got to get on a Zoom with him for his last 15 minutes. So, Sasha, if you don't kill me, and Keisha and Ernest.
Oh, you're fine.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I'm proud of what you all are doing.
We appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
I know we talked about this a little earlier, guys, but I do want to elaborate on it. Houston's had a drastic increase in violence in 2020, and Cory was asking what's the root cause or causes. And I know we talked about domestic violence and people being in the house, all year long, and maybe getting tired of their partners, to kids, having access to guns in their house because they're virtually working all day long while their parents are out to work. What other causes are you guys seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump holistically, or Sasha, if you want to go first about specific Harris County issues.
Well, so, I mean, I think in Harris County, we're trying to figure out how much of this is actually related to COVID. Prior to COVID, it seems that the crime rates were decreasing.
Mhm.
And now we have COVID. And so I think it's kind of some of what we're hearing, people being at home, people, additional stressors, things of that nature that are causing some of these acts of violence to break out. However, we want to be sure. So I'm not one of those people who are going to just start talking about
Right.
this is the cause and this has happened. I don't believe in fake news, so I'm not going to do it on this platform. I will say that people have said, COVID might be a reason, and it may be, but we won't know until later.
Right.
We can aggregate data properly, to make sure that we're seeing, yes, this had the impact, or no, it wasn't, and it was something else.
So I'm gonna jump out there because we work with quite a few major cities, and we're seeing almost every single one. When COVID started, the spike started. And it wasn't because there were less police officers. It wasn't because the sentencing changed. Frankly, it's because a lot of the root causes that fuel gun violence intensified.
Yeah.
So coming back to what those root causes are, when you think about it from a public health approach, a lot of us are so focused on the injury and mortality, but you got to work up and think about, okay, what are the risk behaviors? And then what are the factors that are creating those risk behaviors? And some of the major factors that create a more violent risk behavior or likelihood to be more violent, frankly, is comes back to living conditions. Are you in a safe home? Do you have safe places to be? Do you have a network of folks who can keep you mentally and emotionally safe? And a lot of those have fell apart during COVID. Everyone assumes that because kids aren't getting shot in school, that it's not a problem anymore. But homes are not necessarily safe spaces, unfortunately. Neighborhoods are not necessarily safe spaces. And so one of the biggest factors is just making sure that we acknowledge that just being in the house, while it might be safe to you in the suburbs or wherever you live, in a lot of communities, the violence is around them every day. And going to school or going to the rec center or even going to work for adults was an opportunity for them to be in a safer environment.
Mhm.
The other thing, if we want to think about root causes, again, the thing that we really push people on is to think about the highest, the population is most at highest risk of being violent. And right now, unfortunately, that is survivors of gun violence, which is very predictable, right? In a program, in an effort that we're not actually investing in. Most major cities have $0 invested in survivor support programs. And then secondly, looking at folks who have a history of violent offense. Usually someone who commits a homicide didn't start with that. But they do have a bread trail, right, that you can kind of go back and look at. And a lot of times it goes back to school age. If we can look at third graders and decide how many prisons we can build, then we should be able to look at third graders and develop mental health resources we need, how many more job training programs we need, how many more family planning programs do we need. We're not doing that. And so I think if nothing else, if we focus on survivors and those who are already statistically most at risk, we can have a huge impact on reducing gun violence. But then once we do that, we got to step back and look at the living conditions and put pressure on our policymakers to improve the living conditions without pushing people out of their neighborhoods, which is...
That's what I wanted to say, Greg. Like, the reason why I don't want people to be able to use COVID as a scapegoat.
Right.
Why? Because these issues already existed.
Yeah.
And the fact that a pandemic was able to create more problems, it lets us know that we needed to invest in this a long time ago.
Yeah.
We need to create the infrastructure to make sure that these things are in place. People are having the resources and the living conditions that they deserve and that they need all the time. Not just because, hey, there's a pandemic and I want to make sure that people aren't getting put out of their houses. People are always getting put out.
Right.
Why aren't these programs that exist all the time? Not just that way, not just for COVID. And so that's why I'm apprehensive to say, well, COVID is the cause, because when there is no pandemic, I don't want individuals saying, oh, well, we are back to normal. We don't need to go back to normal. Normal was not working for Black and brown communities.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that, Sasha. I really am. Ernest, I want to talk one more time about the petition because I know we have some new people that entered in the chat. So can you please break down the petition for them and why it's so important for everyone who's watching right now to sign this petition?
Most definitely. So we currently have a petition. You see the link on the screen that asking your senator and your House of Representative member to support the Break the Cycle of Violence Act, which is a piece of legislation that was introduced by Senator Cory Booker that would provide federal funding for community-based organizations that is doing this work. As Sasha's been talking about, as Greg has been talking about as well, there are organizations that's been doing this work on the ground in Black and brown communities forever, but don't get the same funding that some of these major organizations get. And so this funding would possibly help these organizations to be able to do their work long term. They're not then, regulated to who's in office locally, who's in their state house, who's in their city council. But this money will keep them moving and continue to provide the services and the needs of the community through this. So we ask you to go and sign this petition, asking your congressperson to support and sponsor the Break the Cycle of Violence Act. Right now in Texas, we don't have either the senators, nor do we have congressional folks, House Representative folks signed on to support this right now. So in Texas specifically, as we are currently being broadcast off of the box, but across the country, we're asking everybody, whoever's looking at this, to please, sign the petition and continue to add pressure onto our Congress folks. We got through November, but we have some work to continue to do for our communities as well.
It literally takes 15 seconds. And please pass it on to anyone you know. You can send them a text message or you can send them an email. You can send it on Instagram or Twitter. We're on there all day long, every day.
That's right.
Yeah. Cory made a great statement. He said COVID revealed the cracks in our society's infrastructure, to Sasha's point.
Yeah. And as I always talk about, gun violence, especially in settings where it's not, where's white folks? And they talk about gun violence. And I say, gun violence in Black and brown communities is like an onion. There's many layers to this situation that's the root cause of gun violence, as Greg was saying. And that, we have to not only deal with the gun violence, but we have to deal with the housing aspect of it. We have to deal with the food desert aspect of it. We have to deal with the employment aspect of it. It's not just a gun issue. And so, these organizations, help to peel back that onion, and then also, and get back to you, Keisha, that, the piece, we always talk about individuals that pass away, that die, and the homicide rate. We never talk about, or hardly talk about, the survivors of gun violence and the many individuals that are shot, but then have to survive past that day. Right. And so we did a report. Amnesty did a second report called The Scars of Survival. And so it talks about those challenges that individuals go through and those families go through once they have had this incident of being shot, from paralyzed to, a mental health situation. One of the cases was in the report was a young man that was getting ready to go play football, end up getting shot over the summer, paralyzed now for the rest of his life. So his whole mindset had to change in an instant of what his life was going to be like. And so these organizations continue to provide that support, even for those survivors that many times don't get the conversation or the headlines that they deserve as well.
And I know we have about, guys, a few more minutes. Any closing remarks from any of you?
Well, I just like to say, I'm sorry. I just like to say for those of you who are listening, just continue to support the work. I saw someone in the chat asking the work that we're doing on violence prevention. I know Greg is going to talk about this a little bit, but we're working with Harris County on violence interruption programs and hospital-based violence prevention programs. As I mentioned earlier, we are doing the Empowered Survivor Project, where we are giving direct cash assistance to domestic violence survivors who are being, in terrible situations right now due to COVID. They can apply at purejustice.org. And we're doing a multitude of things, but we need people to get involved. It is so important for individuals to come to community meetings, raise their voices, call their congressmen and women, call their local elected officials, and let us know what is happening in our communities so that we can come together to put the pressure where it needs to be to get these root cause things addressed. Because if we cannot address the root causes, we will only be treating symptoms, and that will never cure or break the cycle that we're talking about.
Band-Aid on it. Anything you would like to say, Greg?
Yeah, I would like to close. And thank you all for having us here. I mean, again, as a survivor of gun violence, I never forget how close I was to not being here. And I always think about and honor the folks who couldn't be here to speak up. In my neighborhood, I helped organize a peace cookout. And this past summer, the community rallied around it, and it was a great event to celebrate peace. But then a shooting broke out, and Devon Mcneill was shot and killed. And Devon was someone just like Ernest, very promising young guy playing football, was a talent, was a good kid, was good in school, but lost his life. And I share that story not to make you sad necessarily, but just to the community is trying their best. Like, we're working hard every day to try to reduce gun violence, and we're already feeling pain and seeing trauma and seeing the conflicts, but we can't give up on our neighbors. We can't give up on our own family. So we're out here doing the work. But we aren't seeing our political leaders step up and do the work. And the solutions do exist. And that's the huge problem. We're not talking about lofty, ideal, creative things. We're talking about real programs that have proven to work for decades, but don't have the resources or the funding. President-elect Joe Biden already committed $900 million to invest in these types of programs. We need to hold him accountable to that. We hear leaders at the state level in Texas and the city level who say that they share their prayers, their condolences, that they're committed to this issue. We have to hold them accountable to that. And unfortunately, we haven't seen those dollars yet. We haven't seen that movement yet. We haven't seen that change yet. But we have heard the prayers and condolences over and over and over again. And so I want to just challenge anyone who's watching this, sign the petition, figure out who your local leaders are, and figure out how you are going to hold them accountable to investing in our communities. We have lost way too many lives. We have been to way too many protests. We've watched way too many videos. What we need now is investment in our lives and not just waiting to pay for death. And so I am here to advocate for this. I hope you all will follow us. We're the Community Justice Action Fund. We're on social media at CJ Action Fund. And we will be relentless in fighting for these policy solutions and to fighting for folks like Sasha and like Devon, who unfortunately are in this battle and outnumbered by the crisis. So thank you again for having us. Thank you, Keisha, for doing a great job moderating, and Ernest for all your leadership as well.
And lastly, Ernest, I know you have some closing remarks before we get up out of here.
Yeah, just real quickly as well. Thank all of you for being here. Keisha, thank you for moderating. For those, and Greg hit most points, that we want you to sign a petition. Not just get this great information, but we need you to activate and move as well. And so sign the petition, challenging your local officials, whoever you voted for this past November. Make sure you hold them accountable and make sure you have them do for your community what you need them to do. Then also for our high school and college students that are watching, write. If you like to write, if you have stories in your mind, talk about how gun violence has affected your community. Sign up for our essay contest. Come get this money we got for you. Let's make sure you're able to, to do some things in your future, but most definitely get involved with the conversation. And so, see us on amnestyusa.org, and we'd love to get involved with you. You get involved with us as we do this work on local, federal, and national and international levels.
Ernest, Sasha, Greg, thank you for all the work that you've done and that you will continue to do. Thank you for being here today. I've been educated immensely from just being here on this panel, moderating here tonight. So thank you guys so much. Again, don't forget to sign the petition. And please, we would love to hear from our youth. You guys are important. We value you. We want to hear from you. So please, 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 if you have a student that's in high school or college, pass the word along. I know when I was in high school, I didn't like writing essays. They said, hey, I can win some money. I'm definitely going to do it. So let them know there is money involved. Thank you guys so much. And stick around, everyone, because we have a short video right after this.
Hi, my name is Kate Ranta, and I'm a domestic and gun violence survivor. Almost 6 years ago, my estranged husband stalked me to my apartment in Coral Springs, Florida. He pushed in on my apartment door, and my father and I were on the other side trying to push back and keep him out. And all of a sudden, 3 bullets came through the door.
Hi, my name is Nakia, and I'm from Chicago. After going grocery shopping with my daughter, my son, and my sister, I pulled up into the parking lot of my then job. And before I can get it out of my mouth, gunshots erupted.
I grew up in the Austin area in Chicago. Austin is numerically it's the most violent neighborhood in Chicago. I became aware of my first homicide, I want to say 9 years old, walking to the mailbox. A guy was getting robbed for his boom box, and he didn't want to give it up, and the guy shot him in the head.
And my father was shot twice, and I was shot twice in front of my 4-year-old son, my son I had with my estranged husband.
And the last shot shattered the back window. And in the back is where Takaya sat. So I get up out the van and run to the other side of the van, open the door, and she was just laying there. And she had been shot.
In my mind, my mama gave me some mail to put in the mailbox. I stepped around them, put the mail in the mailbox, came back home. My mom asked me, was I all right? I said, yeah, I'm good. She gave me maybe 50 cents, or back then that was a lot of money. Bought me some candy. That was my therapy.